Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start by doing a Pledge of Allegiance.
Which stands one nation, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
I will forego the roll call as we already have the sign-in sheet, and I have everybody signed in here. Can I have an approval of the agenda, please? Commissioner Kirk, seconded by Commissioner Perez-Bedia. Any discussion? So moved. We're going to move on to public comment. Do we have anybody in the public that would like to speak? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close that portion. Thank you. Do we have any board reflections at this time? Seeing none, I'll close that portion. Thank you. We are moving. I'm not under this. I don't suspect this is going to last. Moving on to the board report, we do not have a board report tonight. There's nothing new to bring forth on the board, and this is what we discussed at the planning session. There was nothing new to bring. So we're going to go ahead and move from the board report on to the superintendent's report. Superintendent Obeng.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Porter, Chair Porter. We have the last installment of our budget presentation for you this evening. So I know you've been through quite a few of these presentations, so there are areas that we will try to expedite and get to some of the salient pieces so we can leave more room for questions. We also, at the end of the presentation, do have a set of questions we'd like to respond to, questions we received from either from the public or from commissioners that we'd like to publicly send some information around. We will also continue to add these questions to our budget website with the Q&A so people can go back and refer to some scripted responses. You've heard this message, and we've talked about the growth district and the lack of resources or funding we're receiving through the state process. I won't rehash that too much, but one of the things I will say is that we do need to shift our thinking in terms of being a growth board and doing that program evaluation and how do we do things differently in order to prepare for growth and also prepare for programming for our students as they move on to college, career, in the workplace. You've seen these slides in terms of the community consultations. So we're bookending the process. We started with the community in terms of talking with the community and asking their advice and their commitment. And the process will end with the community when the vote is taken in terms of the results of our process.
Just a refresher, where we started the process was to take a look at our projected spending for FY17 if we didn't make any changes in how we delivered the services. And during that process, we also received some updated information on various other factors that impact our budget. And the net impact of that information was that we identified a roughly $2.5 million gap between the spending if we didn't change our approach at all, and the allowable limit under the Act 46. And so we set about trying to figure out how to fill that gap, and we identified $1.1 million worth of surplus revenue. That is the amount we expect to have at least that much as a result of the audit. And then we also identified roughly $1.4 million in reductions across the district. Approximately $400,000 we envision coming from the central office and departments, and the balance coming from various school level changes.
Hey, just to reiterate the process we used in terms of responding to our challenge. First, we identified clusters of areas where we could find dollars or increase our spending. And then we moved into the investments and buyback phase. I'm so happy we decided to go with the buyback phase, because even in the last few weeks, there are things that are happening internally that we can see that would have an effect for us in terms of being able to change. And people's lives change. Sometimes, people decide they're moving on to different things, they're moving out of our district, and then that creates another opportunity for us. So I'm glad we've engaged in that process. At the same time, we've always had the goal of delivering a balanced budget under the cap and also maintaining viable programs at all levels of our schools. You've seen these slides. You know that we've taken some time to examine our central office and departments, and no department has been untouched in terms of review, and we've been able to identify these areas. And at the high school level as well, too, we've been able to include every area in terms of review, and we were able to through our data, identify that if we were able to reduce sections in certain areas, we could consolidate, and that would derive us with some FTEs that would contribute to the pot. At the same time, we're committed to offering programs that are going to be viable for students to find their pathways to the college, the workplace, and other career paths.
I'll do the middle elementary school. So once again, here we've identified a range of FTEs that we think is achievable utilizing the strategies that are outlined here. So these are familiar. They're the same things that we've presented before. And also at the middle and elementary level, the intent is to avoid any reductions in the mandatory special education or ELL areas. And as we've mentioned, we also identified a series of other areas that we are hoping to devote some time to exploring before we have to make some of our final choices. And these are some of the areas where if we can identify some additional savings, that we can turn around and invest those in the buyback process that Yao's described.
This slide is just to remind us that we have set some priorities and some goals, and that we should be mindful when we're doing the budget process to ensure that we're resource allocating the big goals that you approved. And so kind of put that up there to kind of remind us that, yes, we're not just making decisions and just saying this is good, this is not good, but we're looking at our priorities and also looking at our data in terms of what are the needs are within their system. Under the student section, you've seen this, this slide that shows some of the investments that we're going to be able to reallocate in order to continue to move the organization forward. And under the staff, you've also seen this as well, too, in terms of looking at things like trauma training. And some of these items were items that the board identified in some of the committee areas that felt they were high priority areas. Restorative justice, and looking at, I think I mentioned before in terms of our data, the middle school definitely had some particulars in terms of need, in terms of curriculum supports, as well as social and emotional, and so we're paying attention to that in terms of being able to bring them up to scale.
So the third pillar of the board goals was the system area, and I just wanted to take a moment to remind folks that two of the items on the list here, the bottom two related to the Champlain campus and the Edmonds Elementary campus work, that is work that we would do with the proceeds of the $2 million bonds. We had some questions about that, and we're going to come back and answer some of those questions later, but I just wanted to remind folks. So the bonded money would pay for that work. The general fund budget pays for some of the debt service on that. So there is an impact on the general fund, of course, but that's a small fraction. The roughly $2 million is what goes toward actually doing this work, and that's the bonded money. One of the things we tried to do was just lay out the general fund revenues over a few years to highlight some of the changes that we've encountered. This is, again, something that will be familiar, but I wanted to remind folks once again that we are in a position to have to make up some ground for some of the revenue that the school district used to receive, and due to some changes in interpretation by the Agency of Education, we no longer receive some of that revenue. So that's one of the areas where we mentioned it to our legislative delegation. I know some members of the board have taken particular interest in this area, so it's an opportunity perhaps in the future for a change that would work more to our advantage. But the key number here is the bottom right-hand corner number. That's the the $58 million number education spending. So it's one up from the bottom right-hand corner, and that's the number that really drives our tax rate, which is on the next slide. So the tax implications, this has been somewhat of a moving target, but it hasn't changed since, well, it hasn't changed since yesterday, since we presented to the City Council, which is great. And we've had some stability here, but I just want to caution folks again, and I'll walk through it a little bit, but these numbers can still change. They can change because the legislature can take some action to change essentially the amount that the dollar yield will help support. And it could potentially change as a result of some spending decisions made by other districts as well. So remember, we have a statewide education fund that supports a lot of the education spending. And by necessity, the state has to make some presumptions about what school districts across the state will do in terms of budget decisions. And those assumptions drive that $9,870 figure. So that right now still remains an estimate. We hope it doesn't change dramatically so that we have some kind of consistency in what we're presenting. But I just wanted folks to know that this could still change. And obviously, if we get updated information, we'll let you know. So you start with the education spending figure. That's a $58 million. You have to account for our equalized pupils and then the dollar yield, and ultimately also include the CLA adjustment, which is the relative kind of weight that our property has here, whether it's been recently appraised or not. And so the net result of all this is an actual homestead tax rate that we're estimating at $1.6829 per $100 of value, and that translates into about 2.85 cent increase over the FY16 rate, which is about 1.72% increase. We provided a couple hypothetical scenarios here just to illustrate what the impact is. You can see from the first set, it's about a hypothetical property taxpayer in a $250,000 household, and the tax difference from FY16 budget would be about $71. For income payers, they could actually see a reduction under this proposal. And as I've mentioned, it would be natural to wonder why one sort of taxpayer could see an increase and another could see a decrease. And as far as the arithmetic goes, it has to do with some of the variables that are, and particularly the CLA, that isn't part of the income taxpayer's calculation, but there are some calculations, there are some variables that are part of the property taxpayer calculation. And so because those variables differ, obviously, you get different outcomes.
So we've reached the state where we're able to give a recommendation throughout the process, and I know board members have been following the process, so it's kind of a foregone conclusion in terms of what we're going to say, but I'll read it just the same. The superintendent recommends the FY17 spending be sufficient to meet the educational needs of the district without exceeding the legislative imposed spending cap. To avoid the tax penalty, we recommend that education spending not exceed the $14,133.35 per equalized pupil. Resulting in spending at this level could produce a tax rate increase of 1.72%.
So we added a couple slides from our prior presentation that I wanted to just make sure folks understood, because one of the things that, one of the areas of Act 46 that has not received much attention in the media is the change to the ballot language. So there's now a specifically prescribed set of language that needs to be used on the ballot, and I'll get to that slide in a moment. But it's just important for folks, I think, to understand that that means that the question that we will be putting before voters will look different than it traditionally has in Burlington. So with that said, I'm just going to move ahead to the ballot question slide. So the big paragraph in the middle is what we believe the ballot question would look like under the current law. And it speaks to both a total budget figure, which includes not only the general fund, but also all the grants, things like food service, BTC, all the kind of stuff that isn't driven by our tax rate or isn't subject to our tax rate, but is part of the total spending that the district does. That's a number that Burlington hasn't typically had on the ballot. They've focused on the general fund, which obviously was more closely related to the tax rate. So I think that's an important change to note. And then it also makes reference to the equalized pupil spending amount, education spending per equalized pupil. That's the number that is subject to the Act 46 cap. So it obviously makes sense that that would be included in there. And the percentage, which is 2.14%, is the percentage increase, the percentage increase on education spending per pupil that's allowable under that cap. That's the 2.14%. I added another sentence in at the bottom of the slide. We are checking with, getting some legal counsel on this because we want to know if it's permissible to include additional information in the ballot question. We were concerned that the structure of the ballot question as prescribed by law is a little bit misleading because people could quite naturally look at the 2.14% figure and presume that that is the impact on their tax rate, which obviously isn't exactly true. And so one of the ideas we had was, once we've met the obligations of the statute, can we add additional information so that the voters can understand it more clearly? So we've reached out to our attorney on that. We got some preliminary feedback, and what you'll see in the sample motion that I posted on board docs was an attempt to incorporate that without kind of binding us. Obviously, if we can't put it on the ballot, if we get a response that says, you know what, you absolutely have to stick with only what's in the law, then we wouldn't do it. But we think that there's at least, it's at least worth considering trying to provide some of that extra information. So that is a quick summary of the changes to the ballot and what we would expect it to look like.
Okay, and finally, just to review our process, when we started in November with the community consultation, and then you can see all the significant dates where we were able to present updates. Each of these opportunities, there has been public input and public opportunities, so there are more than 10 opportunities here. At the same time, with our budget website, we've had that continuously updated in terms of the framing of questions, and people have been sending questions via website and through email to myself and through commissioners as well. And we've also had the opportunities to have hard copy questionnaires at school sites if individuals didn't have access to internet and they wanted to find out more about the budget, they could do that as well. We've also reached out throughout the process with our multicultural liaisons, and they've gone into the communities and worked with parents who may have limited English or don't have the time to come to a public hearing and gathered information and send that back. So we've been trying to create as many avenues for people to give us input on the direction we're going. We know that it's everyone's right to advocate. We wouldn't want to begrudge them from what they feel should be expressed. So we welcome that. At the same time, we take that information and consider that with the data and the direction and the priorities set by the board, and then continue to move forward. These are not easy decisions to make, but I'm feeling pretty good that the budget we're presenting and the readjustments and the investments we're making really sets us up to have the real conversation in the spring in terms of our multi-year plan, where we can establish long-term priorities that we can start on an annual basis resourcing those priorities through our budget process, and at the same time do it in a way that we won't overburden the community with large increases in tax hikes. So with that, we're going to move to the last phase. We do have some questions we want to respond to, and then we'll open it up for any further. Also, people can visit. We will continue to update the website with some of these questions. There are some questions that we haven't loaded up yet, but we'll add them on so we can still continue to view the board budget website and get information from there as well.
Great. So I'll start with a few of the questions that came in. One was, and a handful of these came in about our bonds. And the first one is, what's the total amount of bonds that are outstanding? So I went back and just checked. There's about $27.6 million worth of bonded debt that's outstanding at the close of FY15. And that's going to the number that something in that order we'll see reflected in the audit. That's at the close of the last fiscal year. Subsequently, we borrowed the additional $2 million for the current year. So we're currently in the ballpark of about $29.6 million. Second question was, what's the total annual interest in FY17 that we budgeted? And the answer to that's about $1.5 million in interest payments. And just as an additional piece of information, then on top of that, you've got about $1.8 million worth of principal repayment for a combined total of around $3.3 million of debt service. The third question, what was the increase in interest paid from FY16? The answer is about $25,000 or so. And the fourth question, why don't we need to go to the public to get approval for the first $2 million of bonding each year? And I just looked it up. So it's in the city charter. I don't know the history of it, but I was able to find it in city charter section 62. And $2 million is the limit. So anything beyond that, obviously, we'd have to go out and actually have a question on the ballot. And there was a question about whether or not we owe or are aware of any impending IRS or Agency of Education penalties or fines or anything like that. And the answer is no, we don't believe that we owe any penalties to the IRS or the Agency of Education at this time, nor do we expect any in FY17. I think that probably stemmed from some of the issues around some of the rebates related to some bonding we did actually, so it's kind of connected there. But at this point, no, we expect to get all the rebates from the IRS that we believe we're entitled to, and we don't expect to pay any penalties or that there are any that will be levied on us in the future. Let's see. There was a question about the spending, whether or not we overspent last year's budget. So as we've said, we want to wait for the audit to kind of provide the nuances of that answer. But I think in a very general sense, I can say when we think of just about the school's general operating fund, the good news is we didn't overspend that. That's our kind of basic general fund that we knew we would have a lot of pressure in, but it looks like we actually did pretty well there and ended up not overspending it. But I want to temper that remark by just letting folks know that there are other funds, and as I've reviewed some of the preliminary draft audit feedback, there are some of these other funds that also support activities that look like they did finish up in deficits and situations where we would need to go and address those in the future. So overall, no, we didn't overspend the general operating fund, but there's other areas of challenges that definitely exist and are going to need to be addressed going forward.
There are a couple of other general questions that I've heard numerous times from different community members and also probably shared from board members. One has to do with the timelines in terms of specificity of our rollout in terms of, and if you look at the process in phases, there's a development phase, which we're doing, developing the budget, and then there's probably there's the approval phase. So the approval phase is now, here, and also in March when the community votes on the approval. And then we have the implementation phase. So the implementation is where we actually say, we've got a budget, right? We've got some ideas in our development phase in terms of where we want to go. Now we have to implement it. So that's where we're continuously working with our administrators, and they'll be able to give the specific details in terms of, okay, developing schedules at every level and saying, this is how it works, and then be able to start having conversations with individuals, because we'd like to have individuals who are impacted have the conversations first before we go public and say, your job is eliminated or you're being redirected to do something else. And if you look at that timeline, contractually, we have until the end of March, but I realistically see after the March 1st vote date, that's the date that we can start the implementation and we can say, okay, here we go. At the same time, we're starting that hopefully after tonight, we start that sort of analysis and administrators in the school level will start doing the scheduling piece to ensure where the nuances will go out. So that's sort of the timeline. You'll see there will be areas after the vote happens that we'll be able to say, yeah, we can bring that forward because there will be no other variables that will make that change. And we'll be able to announce and say, yeah, this area is going to look like this for next year or the year after. Also, I also have restructuring of central office that I'll bring forward, which will illuminate some of the reductions at the staff level for us as well too. So you'll see that. So that gives you a little bit of a timeline in terms of the development phase, the approval phase, and then the implementation phase in terms of how it would work. The other area I think I would like to address is around, not sure where people really got off on this particular thing, but there were a number of people who were really concerned around the foreign languages programming. And if you've seen on the slides, we've talked about reductions to areas inclusive of foreign language. We're looking at every area. But one of the areas around foreign language is in terms of doing program review, is I definitely see that we have some questions that we need to answer. So in the next spring, when we're looking at developing a multi-year plan and having priorities, we need to answer some questions around if we're going to continue foreign language, in which I'm actually an advocate of, we need to decide if we're going to develop fluency programs or we're doing exposure programs. Right now, we have exposure programs, right? And the exposure programs, you learn a little bit about the language, you learn a bit about the culture, and I'm not sure how far it gets you in terms of actual fluency and being able to use it in a job site or in a community that has that kind of language. And we need to do that so we can have longitudinal plans. I would love to see, if we're going to support foreign language, start from grade 5, I'll pick French. And we're going to say we're going to do French, then we do French really well, grade 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and there's those options. So an individual student could take that course right all the way through, so when they're in middle school, they're not thinking, okay, well, this is it. It might be there and it might not be there, but there's that connection, and there's some real experiences, and we need to develop what the competencies are in terms of graduating on. So when we get to a graduate level, we can say, hey, if you reach grade 10, you've got this level of fluency, and we can assess that. If you reach grade 11, we've got this level of student. I think that makes real sense in terms of program viability, rather than just doing programs. I'd rather have 3 really powerful foreign language programs than have 5 or 6 programs that are just for exposure. So that's part of some of the rationale around looking at the program assessment and then having the conversations with staff, board members, and community around what is valuable and where do you think we need to take this, and how do we connect that to real curriculum gains and instructional strategies that are going to benefit our students, not just in the short term, but also in the long term as they move on outside of our district. That.
So I'm going to open it to the floor for questions, and we have to have some rules on this one, which is we're going to, each speaker can have 5 minutes to voice their opinion. However, during that time, you're allowed 1 question at that time before I move on to somebody else. So everybody will have a chance for 1 question before I start revisiting the list again. I know many have questions, and we just have to do this to try to allow everybody to have a period of talking.
You have a few questions. I have a few that are just purely clarification based on the bond issue. May I ask those outside of the?
No, why don't you wait? I'll call you enough on it, but I just want to make sure everybody else has time also if they have questions also.
Okay.
So I know you have a question on the bond, on the
It's
bond
just
issue. but-
clarification, just so we understand.
And the others may have to. I just want to call, but you can start. So you can start with your first question or voice your ideas if you'd like to, please.
Okay, so just to clarify, we haven't put a motion forward this is not our debate about whether we adopt the budget. This is just.
That's correct.
questions.
That's correct.
So I do have can I ask just a few clarification questions about the bond issue? So the first question I had, the $29.6 million of debt, since we're retiring some debt every year and taking it on, at what rate is this debt growing?
That's a good question. I didn't calculate the growth rate or anything like that, and I can go back and look at that. We've been taking on more debt than we've been retiring on an annual basis. That's for sure, because as I mentioned, we repaid around $1.8 million. That's what we budgeted to repay this year, about $1.8 million of principal repayments, but we borrowed $2 million. So, for this year alone, at least you can look at it like that and say, okay, that means that we'll essentially add, a couple $1 million to, or a couple $100,000 to the debt right there. Again, folks should just understand when we're paying, that's like paying back principal, so we still, that's like little pieces of a lot of different bond issuances over time, and then we're taking on a whole $2 million worth of new debt, so.
Can I just add just to that, because I think I've said this publicly already, we're not really comfortable with the tracking of that, and we need to start looking at our budget in a way that we have some contingency that we can deal with some of those pieces, because it's like a credit card, right? We just keep using it. At some point, the interest keeps going up, and we're going to have to pay it off, so we can't keep using that card over and over and over, so we have to come up with a better strategy of starting to buy down our debt, at the same time, be able to allocate dollars to do some of the necessary things we have to do, so we need to start looking at that in a serious way for our next budget cycle.
Okay, and that,
Thank you. I'm sorry, let me just let me see if anybody else has a question. We'll get to you. Anybody else have a question? Yes. Yes.
Why don't we just finish? If Mary
Because I
has
just wanted one,
clarification.
I'm just asking for everybody to have an opportunity. If everybody's all done asking questions, then we'll go ahead and allow Miriam to ask her questions. I just want everybody else, make sure everybody else has had their time, that's all.
So we're all going to go around and do one question each and then
Yeah,
go back
please,
around?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I was just wondering if you could address the legislative discussion this week around the Act 46 caps, given that there's a lot of swirl and discussion of moving that through quickly. I was just wondering if you've been in touch with legislators or the AOE, or, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that, because that's something that we've had questions about in terms of what we're going to do. I think we've come up with a really good plan, and we've decided we're going to execute the plan and let legislators do what they need to do, and then hopefully if something changes, we'll respond to that. I just happened to be in a meeting today with other superintendents, and there were a number that had gone and did delegations at the Senate and the House, and hearing their feedback in terms of what could possibly happen after. It's not promising in terms of hitting at an appropriate time for us to make adjustments without really creating a lot of unrest, right? So we're going to continue to follow the plan. At the same time, if there's something that comes forward that's going to benefit us, then we'll fashion in a way that's going to benefit our taxpayers.
Any other questions? Commissioner Dotson?
A question, if it would be possible for you to give a little more illumination on what the role of a middle school coach will be. What will they be doing?
That is a great question. And the reason why you notice that there isn't any marker on that, it didn't say science coach, didn't say math coach or anything, because I've brought the concept to our staff is that we need to look at the data at the middle school, because I've looked at some of the data, and sit down and actually identify where the gap is, and then utilize that resource to fill the gap. So rather than presupposing, I said, okay, let's do this. Once we get the budget approved, then we say we have the resource, and we'll talk about, okay, what are the needs? What exactly do we need a coach? I've used the word coach because that's the language that we're used to. It may not be coach. We may call it something else, but it'll be a resource that's going to help both middle schools to support the gaps that they're identifying at this time.
Okay, so just to clarify, so it sounds like we might also say something more like some sort of middle school content intervention.
Absolutely.
Because that language just, so I was thinking maybe, middle school has these very specific developmental pieces, and maybe with someone coming to talk about the psychology of the middle schooler.
No, it's going to be really practical in terms
very
of
targeted.
Yeah, I just used that language because that's the language we use here in Burlington, and we've used that language to be consistent.
Thank you, Commissioner Dotson. Anyone else?
you.
Commissioner Chino?
David, too.
Oh, Commissioner Chino.
I just want to ask a clarifying question, and I think you've made this clear, but I just want it to be really crystal clear, that your plan is that the plan that you have in place will not exceed the cap at which the taxpayers would get a penalty.
Yes.
Definitely, no matter what, we're not going to exceed it.
The plan we present for you would not exceed the cap.
I just want to put it out there because of some people's concerns,
Yeah.
and so I just want it to be really clearly said that because what you propose talks about moving numbers, and the state already came back to us and changed things once, and everything changed.
Yeah.
So I mean, at this
So
point,
let me reassure you, our plan is to stay below the cap. If the state came along and we, all of a sudden at the last minute, got a number that really elevated our tax hike above the cap, we would make some adjustments in order to stay below. But right now, and then Nate will want to talk to this, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Like, they're not going to come in at the last minute with something that's going to hike us over that cap.
Right, I mean, so it's important for folks to understand that the spending cap is based on this number, education spending per equalized pupil. And so the changes that the state could make, they could increase that cap, for example, but they're not going to be, the only way that they could put us into the penalty area would be if they lowered everyone's growth threshold, which is not part of the conversation that's coming out of Montpelier at all right now, and obviously wouldn't be well received if boards all set their budgets and specifically to avoid a penalty, and then we're pushed into it. So I think the likelihood of that is de minimis. So there's no chance that we will stumble into it. If there is a change by the legislature, or if there's something else statewide that happens with spending districts by towns, that it could impact our tax rate, but it wouldn't be because it wouldn't subject us to a penalty at all. So it gets a little complicated, but the point to understand is that the tax rate is a combination of a number of these variables, and some of them, like I said, have to do with certain assumptions made by the Agency of Education. If those assumptions are off to some degree, it could essentially increase everyone's kind of what in the language of the old law, like the base rate, but it would play on this dollar yield amount. So it would be like our spending decision drives our tax rate. There's no doubt about that, but it's conditioned by these other variables. So if our rate changes, it won't be because somehow we're pushed into a penalty realm at all. But that doesn't mean that a change couldn't be made that would have an impact driving our tax rate up or down. I think given the conversations in Montpelier, it's more likely that the change would result in a slightly lower tax rate than we're presenting here. But again, that's just speculation on my part. That's been the recent history, but we don't know what will happen, obviously.
Can I just, that's a good question. Just I wanted to add that, we're trying to provide you as much information as possible. We don't want you to be over stressed around something, because I think we're in a good situation right now. But we want you to be able to understand every eventuality. And if I were to look at sort of risk management frameworks, and you talk about black swans in terms of things that could happen that we don't even predict. So we're trying to eliminate all of that. Say, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. We know it won't, these things won't happen, but, so then you have that information in terms of, what could happen. Anything can happen, but right now we follow the rules in a way that I think we're in a good shape.
So
Thank you. I'm sorry. Is there another question?
it's a comment.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, or a response to that, just like a summary of what I heard. So it sounds like your plan is that if the variables changed, you would reduce spending to keep us under the cap. However, you've done extensive amounts of work at this point, and you do not anticipate that happening. And that if any other variables change, they might affect the tax rate, but they're not. It wouldn't be because of a penalty. It would just be because of statewide tax rates.
Correct.
I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly and understand it. Thank you.
And we hope there's a change the other way.
Right.
Commissioner Kurt.
So I just want to be crystal clear as I possibly can. The question has been risen for the last 6 months, whether or not the district actually overspent the voted on amount. For 6 months, I haven't really had a clear answer to that. And before we can actually say, did we or did we not? I mean, you've produced that we're going to have a 1.1% surplus due to unanticipated funding. But with that being said, if you can produce a 1.1% surplus, then you should be able to tell us definitively whether or not we overspent the amount that the taxpayers voted on last time. Because that question definitely drives the new budget, as if we overspent by $2 million, we're already at $70 million, which means we're going to have to produce more cuts just to maintain where we are. And if that's the case, I think the taxpayers have a right to know exactly where we stand.
Yeah. I'll let Nate answer, because I think it's a much more complex response in terms of all the different envelopes of dollars. But I think Nate, if you could just respond in a way that sort of taxpayers would understand
Right.
that clear question
So-
that Commissioner Kirk
So
actually asked.
as I was trying to address before, so if you look at our general operating fund, which was the $67.4 million voted budget from FY15, that number we did not overspend. And what I was trying to kind of caution folks and just to, kind of illustrate some of the complexities, that there are other funds where I've seen that the district does have, looks like, some challenges that are probably deep-seated and need some real attention. So I don't want, by saying that we didn't overspend that year, I don't want to give folks the impression that we're out of the woods and that we've solved all the problems. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in those areas. But the good news is we didn't overspend that general operating fund figure. And to your other point, I've been cautious to say that we believe what we'll see is that $1.1 million surplus. I've been saying that's at least that much. And I've been saying that specifically because we haven't seen the final audited numbers, and that's why I've been hesitant to, try, because eventually when we have those numbers, we will be able to look at exactly and compare those things. And so hopefully that will be something that we'll get to look at soon. But I've been trying to be cautious about that so folks don't presume that we have absolute precision in those numbers. So did that answer the question?
More clear.
More clear. Okay, I'll keep working.
Clear as much?
Not perfect, but it'll do. Thank you.
Commissioner Barlow.
Thank you. Mike, I have concerns about the world language cuts that I've shared with you. So that's my comment. And my question sort of relates to that. And is like, I think that it's a candidate for your buyback list, but I'm wondering how you will prioritize those things that might be bought back and who will make the decisions on them.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll use a reverse process in terms of looking at the list and then having conversations with our administrators and saying, okay, if you could recover something, what would it be? They may say world language is a priority, or they may say, you know what, right now this is what we need in terms of coming back. But that's the process we would use.
Thank you. Student Representative Bucci.
Thank you. I was just hoping for a little clarification on the language issue with the current, with the 2017 budget. What is allotted for that, and will there be middle school language in the coming year?
There will be middle school language.
Okay.
There will be high school language.
Okay.
What we're proposing in all the subject areas is looking at where we can reduce and consolidate. So
Okay.
we're not eliminating things across the board, but we are looking to reduce in areas. Right?
Thank you. Did I miss anyone before I come back to the beginning again? Commissioner Stoll.
Thank you. So I do want to come back to the debt issue for just a minute and just say that I didn't really make a comment after getting the answer last time. And my comment is that I'm very pleased to hear that Superintendent Obeng is thinking of alternative ways rather than continuing to bond $2 million each year. For me, that's an issue both of financial stability for the district. I'm not a financial analyst, but if you have an annual budget of $88 million and debt of $29.6 million, is that a good ratio or a bad ratio? How would one look at that? So I'm hoping, I know there's been a lot of things going on in the finances of the district, and I'm hoping we can take some time to look into that. The other issue for me it brings up is one of communication and transparency. You know, I have been on the board for a couple of years, and this is the first time where I really stood back and said, wait a minute, every year we bond $2 million, you know, without asking the public, and the gross amount, you know, pushing $30 million is a lot of money. And we're talking about a need for some major revisions or maybe even rebuilding our high school, which is another $40 million. So I just wanted to put out there that I think this is a major financial priority, and I know this is not the time to go into it, but I do think as we talk about the budget, we need to remember this as a backdrop. And one of the reasons why I think being prudent about the budget this year is a good thing. So that's my comment. I have one other question, which is a simple one. I was really intrigued by the tax rate payments that you put up, particularly the income payers getting a reduction. is that sort of an artifact of just the number you picked, or is that any income payer is going to see a reduction in their taxes with this situation?
That's a good question. I think that it wouldn't, I have to think about the math on this one. So, under this proposal, give me some time to think about that one. I'm trying to think of the scenario. Generally, it's all, it's all ratio, so I'm tempted to say that it would go down, but I want to think through a few other scenarios and maybe just sketch out some numbers. So I can get you those answers, but rather than speculate, and I want to make sure that I'm absolutely right about that. I should also note that it's kind of in the footnote of one of the slides, but so that people do understand, Vermont's system also has a kind of what's called a circuit breaker. So if you are below a certain income level, I think it's around $47,000, then your tax is capped as a percentage of your income, irrespective of the different spending decisions that a district might make.
I recall from prior years that the percent, Liz, you might remember this, but the percent of taxpayers in Burlington that pay on the income through their income as opposed to their property is very high, right? Wasn't it a large amount? I recall it was much larger than
I
we
mean, the
thought
issue in
last
Burlington is 70% of the housing is rental and 30% are homeowners. So of those homeowners, I can't say.
But of those,
But that's more the issue in
yeah.
Burlington.
So I guess I just think when we're talking about, once we settle on the budget and we go forward and we're talking about it, that's something that we should understand, and it would be great to know really what the effect is.
Yeah, and I could definitely do some more scenarios up that you folks could have, so that if you get a question and you can kind of ballpark it, that could help. And I'm trying to remember, I know in the past, I think some organizations it might have been like Public Assets or others, have produced little tools that allow folks to, or it might have even been the Agency of Education, but that allow folks to kind of go in and plug some of their personal characteristics in to kind of get a more, custom estimate of what the impact would be. So certainly, if that comes through again, I'll share it with folks, and you can feel free to circulate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Judson.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a question about the possible buybacks also, and I didn't quite understand your answer to Mark Barlow's question about possible buyback for the language programs. But can you explain to me again the process for deciding on buybacks, and are kindergarten paras even in that possible realm?
I can't hear you, Ann.
And I want to start calling in from my living room. That's a good move.
Okay, tell me if you can hear me. So Commissioner Barlow's question was around what would the process be for buyback. And so I stated that if we got in a situation of looking at buybacks, we would do a reverse process where we would have conversations with our administrators in terms of what they felt would be something that they would be a priority for them to buy back. So we'd have conversations with those administrators around that. Your second question was about paras, right?
Right.
Okay. So paras, yes. The paras are not on the table, just to be straight out there. Initially, when I started investigating the para situation, I know the implementation of that was within only 2 months, and I felt that's way too soon to be reinstating without gathering some information. So we have staff sort of monitoring and continuing to look at that situation. I also have the experience in Ontario. We spent the last 5 years implementing universal kindergarten, and we've had that process where we've had 2 adults in the kindergarten classrooms, so a teacher and what was called an educational assistant. And so I'm not adverse to having that resource in there, but what I'm really looking at is what's the appropriate resource. It may not be a para, it might be something else that actually supports the classroom for students to achieve, and looking at what does that look like in terms of the curriculum delivery. So I think there's more investigation there. I'm not saying that we wouldn't look at it at some point and say, you know what, we need to give some support to kindergarten. I just felt that it was quite soon, and the early responses that I had from administrators were not signaling that this was something that needed right away the next day at that point.
Okay, so another follow-up question. I'm wondering if did the curriculum committee tonight address the difference in reading abilities between the year that we had kindergarten pairs and the year we did not have kindergarten pairs?
No, they did not.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kirk.
So I have one follow-up, another question, probably just clarity, but I noticed on some of these you exclude BTC in the food service program, and my history with the district is that we're spending money, budgeted money for the food service program that carries a nearly $1 million surplus, and I'm wondering if we're still funding that. I know it was partial funding of that system, because that system is supposed to be nearly self-sufficient.
Right. So you're right that the food service did have a substantial fund balance, and for that reason, we didn't plan to make a transfer to them in this budget. And the intent long-term is that it is kind of a self-sustaining enterprise fund where the revenues that that food service generates cover their costs. I will say that that surplus money, which does have to stay with food service, by the way, we can't just kind of draw that into our general fund budget. There could be a substantial drain on it at some point in the near future, kind of by design, which is if we bring a couple additional schools onto the community eligibility program, which allows for essentially the whole school doesn't have to pay for lunch. It's a federal program, and I won't go into the details, but in short, kind of the first year you make that transition, you can at times, as I understand it, you can essentially like lose money for the first year because you have to, at some point in the year, you stop charging kids. And then the idea is you can then start increasing the number of kids you serve, which draws in more federal reimbursement, and in the end, and that's something that Doug Davis has done really successfully, in the end you actually bring in more revenue for the program and allows you to do some of this really exciting stuff. So just so folks know, it's a little bit of a tangent, but there is money there. There is a plan to use it. They have federal rules about like kind of the level of that balance that they can have too, but we're not supporting food service in this proposal with a transfer for exactly that reason, because they don't need it.
Thank you, Nate.
I'm going to have one more for Commissioner Curry, and then we're going to still be able to debate when we get to the budget motion. Okay? So we're just going to go ahead and close this out with Commissioner Curry, and we'll move on to the rest of the superintendent's agenda. Okay? Thank you.
So I have a number of questions. So on the last budget presentation we saw on January 5th, that document has, in the estimated general fund revenues, a prior year surplus line item of 1.1, and so the grand total 17 proposed budget was $69,869,865. And then this proposal, this iteration does not show the 1.1 prior year surplus, and the grand total 17 proposed number is smaller. It's $68,776,000.
So I wonder if, sorry to interrupt, I wonder what version you're looking at. The one up here
The
has
one January 5th?
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
that one.
Yeah. So I added that. Okay, so you're asking where that came from?
Yeah,
or-
why the number's different.
Right. So I realized after we did that first presentation, we talked about, the slide at the beginning that shows using the surplus. And so after looking into it, it seemed most appropriate to represent it on here. So it was
So you
always in there, but
rolled
it
it
wasn't
into.
a separate line. Like it was on the completely different slide. And so
Right.
that's why I put it in here to show that money.
So you, in the budget tonight, you took it out of surplus and just put it into the
Right,
bottom
well,
line.
it is a surplus. I'm just reflecting it as essentially general fund revenue here, which was, after I looked into it, my understanding of kind of the most accurate way to show it. It doesn't change the bottom line education spending per pupil number. It was kind of like before it
Well,
was netted out
doesn't it
of both
change the
sides.
number we're voting on?
No, it actually doesn't change the number we're voting on. I'd netted out before, because you're not, this is one of the differences, you're not voting on the general fund number anymore. If we go back to the ballot
So tonight,
question.
are we voting on the $68 million number? Or the $58 million number?
Well, it's a good question. I actually crafted a sample motion, and I don't remember exactly what I put in it, but I struggled with it, to be honest, because I wanted to capture the most meaningful part. Let's just see what I wrote. So folks have access to board docs. They can see this under item 6 also. And this is not required. I just took a stab at offering some hopefully helpful suggestion. But I suggested that the language of the motion speaks specifically to the education spending number and the education spending per equalized pupil number, as well as reference the total ballot question that's coming there. So we can come back to this if you want when we reach that point. But I was trying ultimately to make sure that folks had a sense of both like the really specific controlling element that you were voting on, and also reflect the new law about what's going to appear on the ballot.
I mean, personally, I feel like it's important, if we're going to vote on $88 million, to know what's in that number. And I just don't see any breakdown of that in this presentation, so I think that's just one thing that's important to me, because I see 58 million, I see 68 million, I see 88 million. So I just need something to help me connect the dots.
Right. So you're right, there's nothing else in there. The difference between the general fund number, which is, again, the thing that traditionally, at least in my brief experience, the board's been focused on, versus the $80 million figure, are all of the non-general fund spending, which, as I mentioned, are things like all the Title I, II, and III money, the federal grants that we get, the things like food service that are run like enterprise funds,
Right.
Nellie Mae grant, those kind of other.
Yeah,
revenues that
and
all fold
I
up
mean, I
into
think
there.
because we have new staff in the district, that it may not have transferred the knowledge that we typically see all the numbers we're voting on when we're voting on them. So those are numbers we would normally see. And I wasn't at the last finance committee meeting, so I apologize. I wasn't able to bring this up then, but that's a concern of mine. And then, so with Act 46, where'd Brian go? My question is really the opposite, not that I'm worried about going over the cap, but that if the legislature raises the cap or exempts healthcare spending from the formula, I heard you say that if something happened that benefited us, we'd take advantage of it, but I don't understand how we would do that if we're voting on the budget tonight. So, say they made a decision before next Friday that the cap changed, and then we had the opportunity to address some of the concerns. I mean, I guess I should just back up by saying that my overall feeling about the budget this year is that, we were essentially working from a place of, a political event that happened last year in the legislature, where we were put under the situation we had a cap and we were budgeting because of that, and that was driving the budget. I don't think that's a good way to develop a budget. So the legislature defined the conversation for us, and now, they're still having the conversation, and what I'm not comfortable with is basically saying, well, this is the budget we wanted, so it doesn't matter what the legislature's doing. If the legislature raises the cap and we can exempt the health care premium of 7.9 increase from the cap or something like that, I guess I'm wondering from both you all and my colleagues, why wouldn't we take that opportunity to stay under our cap, but also create a little more breathing room for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, at the end of the day, would be a board decision in terms of, but I think from our perspective, we would look at some of the buyback pieces, how, if there are critical things that we think, okay, well, these are things that we're gonna look at and may want to invest in again, that we could start that process. We might do it differently, but we could at least have that part. If the board wanted to look at a significant increase in the tax rate, then that would be direction that would have to come from the board after our proposal in terms of saying, yeah, we want to go back and do some more or whatever.
So, I mean, I guess that I would ask fellow commissioners then, do we want to create an opportunity in the resolution to look at that option by amending the resolution, that if there is a legislative decision next week, that we leave ourselves the ability to do that?
Point of clarification. If we could spend more, wouldn't that just go towards the buyback?
Yeah, I think I said that initially. It would.
Okay.
It would. Yeah.
So if it's there,
Yeah.
Well, no, once we approve a budget amount, that's the budget amount. Unless we amend, we can't change that unless we reconvene and pass another resolution. I mean, that's our voter-approved budget.
okay.
I mean, am I right? Am I right? Once we approve a budget amount, that's what goes on the ballot?
I mean, so the ballot language, so I'm inclined to agree with you, but I also will say that the way that Act 46 lays out the budget question is a little more nuanced than that. So, and I'm not a legal scholar and I don't know, for sure on this, but my inclination would be to say, hey, if we vote on a budget and we say we're going to spend a certain amount of money, that a change in the caps wouldn't change that we would have already set our spending level. But I also want to point out that the language that we used for that ballot question here, and particularly that total figure, the $88 million, that's by very nature an estimate because of a lot of the things that I mentioned that go into that. We won't even get our title allocations until I forget when actually, but it's going to, you're going to have to have voted on a budget number, and it might even come after the town meeting vote, if I remember correctly. So that is a number that could definitely change depending on, if revenues don't come in, if we get a reduction in grant funds or something, we're not going to be able to spend that money. And similarly, if we got a new exciting grant, we could spend that money, and that's allowable under Vermont law. So the way they've set this question up kind of changes the traditional way I think we've thought about what we're voting on and what number controls. It's a little different in there, which is why when I attempted to craft that motion, I spoke to that education spending number in it also, because I wanted to make very clear that is kind of the limit, and particularly because of the Act 46 caps, I wanted to make clear that the board's saying, this is the level that will allow for spending for education spending, and we won't be going over that into the tax penalty range. So I can't give you a better answer on than that, unfortunately, but I'm inclined to agree that if they just say, okay, healthcare is exempt, it doesn't mean that we go out and we spend whatever amount of money that exemption equates to over and above the planned budget.
Okay.
So then are you saying 58,290, which is not in that language, but it's in our board packet language,
Right.
is the education spending amount based on the per pupil, and that if the caps change in our favor, what are you saying? Then what
I'm
happens to
saying
that
that
$58
if the
million
board,
number?
I'm one person saying this, but I'm saying that if
Well, I
if
just
you
mean, what
pass the
happens to
motion
the
this way,
50?
I would say that you don't. If you pass the motion, here would be an alternate construction of the motion. If you instead said, we're authorizing you to spend up to the per pupil spending limit of the legislative cap, and you didn't put a number on it, right? Then we could say, hey, if that number changes, we can change right along with it. That's not just in the example I laid out. That's not what I did. And I also think, I don't know, I mean, I guess Yao might have a thought on this too. It seems to me a little reactive to try to change that quickly, particularly because we're not, even if they do take action next week and it goes all the way through and both chambers and it's conference and it gets signed by the governor and goes through all that process remarkably fast, we still don't have a whole lot of time to make a change And so we do have the concept of like, could we buy things back in the process? But to actually say, we're going to change our total spending target in the course of, probably less than 2 weeks, it would feel pretty reactive to me. And I think that, we're trying to avoid those type of decisions and actually do it in a really careful and measured way. So it's not a perfect answer. I acknowledge that. It's kind of my best thinking in the moment.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close this portion of, Superintendent's report. You have further items? We're going to go on to the public forum. Okay. Does anybody in the audience wish to speak to the budget presentation? Please.
Hi, I'm Mike Fisher. I'm a parent of elementary school and middle school student. Sorry. So my personal prediction is that the increase of less than 1% in the property tax will mean the voters pass this budget. As a parent, though, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the lack of firm details in this budget. As an example, there are no specifics about the middle school foreign language reductions. And I know that's been a topic of a lot of discussion outside this meeting. As a parent, I want to know what the impact of the budget will be on my children so that I can advocate either for or against the budget. For example, last year, there was a lot of advocacy around the Latin program. I know that advocacy might make the budget process messier, harder, but I think that's the price of democracy. And I understand that making the details public of reductions may make staff aware that their positions are on the chopping block, but I'm not sure that sensitivity to staff is more important than informing voters and parents to the details of the budget that they're being asked to approve. So we have reductions that are not spelled out in detail. We have a buyback program that is theoretical in nature. As Superintendent Obeng, you said in a prior meeting, there is no actual list. So we're placing a lot of trust in Superintendent Obeng. Trust is usually earned. So if the board approves this budget as it stands, I think you all are accountable for how this budget is implemented over the year. And I'm asking for that budget to be implemented in the light of day, not behind closed doors. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to the budget, please? Seeing none, we'll close this. Superintendent Obeng, the tuition rate.
I'm going to defer over to Senior Director Lavery.
So this is a process that we have to go through each year where we set we set what's called the announced tuition rate. This is the rate, these are the rates that, the maximum rates that we would be allowed to charge for the various programs, and you'll see that in a little memo that I attached there. So probably the most important one is the BTC rate that's that's on there. There are a few others too, and I'll just note that there was a change in state law so that in some ways the kind of elementary and through secondary rates are really not that significant now. It used to be the case that we could send some students to other districts and they could come here and all money would flow back and forth on the basis of these rates, and that's just not the case anymore. But there are still a few areas where it does apply, like I said, and that's for BTC in particular, as well as the special education self-contained program on top. So and this is also, I believe, on the consent agenda, so, but just so folks understood what it was, this is something we have to do. We announced this, and we have to supply this information to the Agency of Education by January 15th, and so we wanted to bring it just before the board like we did last year at this time so that folks would see and know it's out there, and yeah, I guess that's about all there is to it.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Commissioner Obeng is the audit update.
Thank you. Senior Director Lavery?
Yeah, so I've been in contact with the auditors, and there's one piece of information they're still waiting for from the city, but there is at least a 50-50 chance that they could be ready to go with the audit by this time next week, which would be January 19th. I also asked them about the prospect of coming to the Finance Committee later in the month, but they're not available at that time. So I wanted to get a sense from the board, and this doesn't have to be definitively answered tonight, but at least folks can think about it, because I asked them to hold the 19th as available to us, and if they can get the information they need and complete it, they would come forward. It's related to like retirement information and stuff from the actuaries. So I want to just get the sense of the board, or at least get a commitment from the board to get back to me and tell them, yeah, plan to come on the 19th, or no, we don't want to, because it would require the board having a special meeting, and you probably have other committee meetings scheduled that day, so I understand that throws a wrench in the schedule. So I'm just putting it out there because we'd hope to get this done in January. If it can't happen, they can still come forward in February, and I put them on notice that if it doesn't happen in January, it'll definitely happen in February. So that's the update. Again, we don't necessarily need a response tonight, but I would like to give them one fairly quickly so that they can make their plans, or that I can move ahead and get something concrete set up in February.
So I'm sorry, just to be clear, you're looking for the possibility of a special meeting on January 19th?
That's the option if you want to get the audit in during January, because they can't come to the Finance Committee. That would be the next week, which felt to me like kind of the next logical place to do it.
Commissioner Stoll?
I would be in favor of having it on the 19th. I think we've been looking forward to it. We'd like to hear it. I think it would be helpful to have. But I do understand, aren't there other committee meetings on that night? So we'd have to.
I have a committee meeting that night, and I'll do my part to make it flexible enough to make it.
So let me ask something just before we do. So we certainly use special meetings for certain time-critical items. Is this a time-critical item that would have to be portrayed in January rather than February?
I don't see it so in terms of its impact on particular decisions, but the Finance Committee has been eagerly awaiting this for about 4 months, and, I think it would be helpful to have this information sooner rather than...
That's actually a fair question. How about if it was brought to the Finance Committee? I'm sorry. How about if it was brought to you to discuss with the Finance Committee without them being present, so you could mull it over before coming to us in February?
I guess I just don't think it's that big a deal if it's the 19th or the 24th or the next month, but I would hate to put it off again. As it happens, the Finance Committee doesn't, unless something happens with this budget and we have to work on this budget again, the Finance Committee doesn't have a lot on its plate this month. So this would be a good month for us to do it. I mean, we could have the Finance Committee meeting on the 19th and make that our Finance Committee. That would be one possibility, and hear from them then.
Commissioner Curry?
I actually do feel like it's fairly urgent to receive the audit as soon as possible. I think going past December 31st is poor practice, and I don't want to set a precedent. I understand the issues with the city, but I also don't want to send a signal to the auditor that it's acceptable to go this late with the audit. And so, I mean, I totally get there's legitimate reasons. It's just, I just don't think it's good practice to push the audit out and just because he's not available for us. So he's available for another client, but I'd like to send a message that we want him to be available to us as close to the end of the year as possible. So I would like to have the meeting January 19th if people are available and can do that.
So the finance meeting is a meeting that anyone can attend, but it wouldn't be a special meeting. So a special meeting, I would be asking everyone to attend.
But he's not available at the finance meeting.
No, the 19th. We could take her finance
move
meeting
the finance
to the 19th.
meeting. Yeah, I think I
Right?
agree.
And then whoever wants to attend that can attend that.
Yes.
Okay, but we're not calling a special meeting.
Right. Let's just have.
Okay.
Is that what you're suggesting?
That's what I'm suggesting. We don't have to have, it actually is Commissioner Stoll's discretion to move her meeting to that period and take this on, of which we could all attend at the finance meeting as a finance meeting.
So you would change your ITC meeting, or our
I
meeting's
would,
at 7 o'clock?
I would be
so-
willing to have my ITC meeting the hour before your meeting. I will adjust my time schedule That way we can, I want to attend both meetings anyway.
That sounds great.
So just let me be clear. So I'll get back to them and say, yeah, if they can make it happen, that's when we want to have it happen. So it's not a guarantee at this point, but, you know, I'll work with them as much as I can and push them to
I
do
would
that.
actually like them to come no matter what, even if they don't have the information from the city, and just let us know what that information is and give us a preliminary view, because they're
Yeah,
going to
I'll
know
run that
what they're
idea by
looking
them.
for, and they're going to know what that, you know,
Yeah.
basically how that impacts the audit. So I'd like it to be a preliminary draft presentation, and then they can submit the final at another point.
And in defense of that, I got to tell you that we've been telling people that we would have it in January.
Yeah,
So
I'm fine with share.
being able to
with
live up to
pushing
that
them
would be
way.
important. Is that good with you?
Yep.
Okay, we're good, thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Obeng, before you defer this one to him also, this is the good news. Commissioner Obeng, Superintendent Obeng, I'm sorry.
Senior
I
Director
don't get to do that part.
Thank you. We have posted some good news, but I do want to highlight one particular one to share with you. So we have a BTC student selected as one of 5 Vermont Presidential Scholars in Career and Technology Education. So Lydia Stricker, who is the individual from BTC, student in Medical and Sports Science program, has been nominated as a Vermont Presidential Scholar in Career and Technology. Lydia was selected as one of 5 CTE students in the state nominated to Vermont Secretary of Education Rebecca Holcomb and recognized at a reception at the State House on December 3rd. The Secretary of Education is scheduled to announce Vermont CTE nominees to the U.S. Presidential Scholars Program this month. Nominees will be invited to apply to the national program in February, and the U.S. Presidential Scholars Program Office will announce the national scholars in May. So we look forward to that announcement. That's it.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, which is the budget resolution. Just so everybody understands the process we're going to hold here, Commissioner Stoll is going to read the resolution. I'll need someone to second. We can go into discussion. Okay. Probably give everybody 5 minutes if you want to take it, but we'd have to hold it strictly to that, okay, because we still have some other things we have to get onto. And then we'll go to a vote. Is that fair? All right, Commissioner Stoll.
Where is the resolution?
It's online, it's under the, you can read it under the detailed,
Okay.
yeah, go to print it and go to detailed, and then you'll find it right there.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. I just want to fall back on the conversation we had about the ballot language versus the resolution. So this is not about ballot language. This is about the budget, right?
That's not true. There's the second piece of it that does take it to the ballot language.
So that's my question. There was some question about the ballot language and what number goes on it. And
Yeah, so I know that, just so folks are clear, what I attempted to do and it's on board docs is I attempted to write a motion that specifically referenced the education spending number, because that's the number obviously that drives the tax rate, that's subject to the Act 46 caps and that sort of thing. But it just felt to me like if I only wrote that, it wasn't quite enough meat on the bones, and that it's like, well, gee, we passed a motion that said education spending is, you know, whatever it is, 58 million or something like that, and now we see a ballot question that has a dollar number that's different from that and a percentage, and where did that come from? And so I was hoping that what I was doing was offering some amount of clarity by incorporating all of that into a, you know, a draft motion, so that people really understood what kind of what it would look like, what the result of that motion would be. So that was what I attempted to do there. Obviously, you know, in the board's discretion, you can change the motion.
another option would be to simply end the motion before talking about the ballot language. And
Yes.
so,
So I'm sorry, can I ask you, just before we do that? We don't have any discretion over the wording for the ballot language.
You don't have any discretion over the bulk of that wording that's in the big paragraph, that's up in the middle of the screen up here. That's specific in Act 46, so that's now state law. We have to ask the question that way. As I mentioned, we are working through our attorneys just to figure out, could we add some other contextual language to that question? Because we were concerned that the change in the way the ballot question looks would be confusing to Burlington voters. I think, just my personal assessment, particularly the percentage number, I think it's only natural that people would look at that number and think, gee, that must be the percentage that the budget is increasing, or that must be the percentage that my tax rate is increasing. But of course, we know the system's more complicated than that, and consequently, it doesn't mean that. So that's an idea, but this has come at us pretty quickly, and so I don't want to suggest that we would definitely add that contextual language, but we are certainly looking into it.
Okay, well, as the person making the motion, I'm going to make the motion without talking about the budget language at this point, because I think that puts us in a bind, and also the language here is not, it reflects Mr. Lavery's concerns that some of the numbers could change as well as the wording of the ballot language, so I'm going to put this forward, and we can talk about it, and if not,
So what are you going to put forward, I'm sorry?
I'm going to put forward the first sentence, which doesn't talk about the ballot language, and it goes as follows. I'd like to make a motion to approve a fiscal year 17 education spending budget of $58,290,175, which equates to $14,133.35 of education spending per equalized pupil, and is the spending limit imposed by Act 46. Period.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Voter language.
Commissioner Barrett, PD. Discussion.
So as the motion maker, can I start the discussion?
You certainly can.
Did you have a clarification, or can I go ahead?
You can,
Okay.
please go first.
So one of the reasons I wanted to make the motion is that I wanted to speak to it first because I strongly support this budget. I think I do understand that it is, in a sense, fortuitous perhaps, started by a discussion about a spending limit imposed by Act 46. But I think the process that's gone into working this budget has been very thorough. It's been based on good numbers, better numbers than we've had in previous years. My sense from listening to the discussions that have gone into the budget is that it is not going to cause degradation in the education of the children of this district. I feel like over the last couple of years, if you look at the increases in the budget versus the increases in the number of students in our schools, we have seen a little bit of what I would call budget creep. I think that in the last couple of years, we've worked very hard as a board to step back and to try and come up with budgets that are sustainable over time. And I wanted to point out that last year, as a board, we settled on a very similar budget increase to the one we're looking at today, and we did it without the cap, and we did it because we felt that we had a responsibility to the taxpayers to step back and look more thoroughly at our budget, and I think that we did that. And I think that this is, in my mind, a continuation of the promise that we made to taxpayers to keep our spending under control, and I'm heartened to think that we've done it, I feel, in a very fair way. I think we've done it in an equitable way, and I think that what this budget does is it continues us towards getting our district to a point where we can now begin to grow, where we can say to the public, you know, we looked carefully at our budget, to use a word that Superintendent Obeng has used, we've right-sized our budget, and now we have the flexibility to grow, and we can grow where we want to grow and how we want to grow, and not be, in a sense, starting from a muddled pot that was probably a little too large to begin with. So I really feel this is a good budget. I want to thank you both for the work that you've done. I hope my colleagues will understand and join me in wholeheartedly supporting the budget. Thank you.
Commissioner Barlow.
Thank you. I guess I'm a little confused about Nate's desire to put additional language into the ballot question, and also, I know it's for clarification, but I'm wondering, do we need to specify the ballot language, any additional ballot language in addition to what was, I guess, we're legally mandated to put in because of Act 46?
Point of order. That question, the question we're debating is approving the education spending, not the ballot language.
Fair enough.
Okay, fair enough.
Next question, please. Commissioner Dotson.
I also would like to come out. I second Commissioner Stoll's hearty support of this budget, and a deep thank you to the professionals, Nathan and Yao and the rest of the people who put this together. It's just been wonderful to have this process since March 2014, when things looked a lot different. And it's really wonderful to have such a orderly, transparent, thoughtful, community, engaged process. And one of the things I most appreciate about this is what appears to be the audit approach to it, the idea that we're, and by audit I mean auditing what's happening in the district. And I will speak, this is just my personal opinion, but it seems clear to me that we are going to have fiscal constraint in educational spending across this nation for some time. And therefore, knowing really well what you're doing, why you're doing it, how well you're doing it, and how investments are having impact is really critical. And language is one of those things for me. So just personal, experience, like maybe some of the others. I had 7 years, including AP. At this point, at each point of my son's experience, I was further along. I had, that was before block scheduling, so it was part of my schedule. Every day I had that class. So probably as a sophomore or junior, I could conjugate a few verbs better than most people, could not keep up at native speed fluency. And I still don't have that ability with a lot of Spanish, and that will be what's most useful to me. I don't have very much opportunity to conjugate verbs, but I do meet people who speak Spanish, and I can't communicate with them. I can't, unless they say, no tan rápido, por favor. And if they slow it down for me, I can get most of it. And I don't know if that was really worth all that. It was a lot of money to get me to this point, and it's not a very powerful point. So language, critical in this, but an audit of what we're doing and looking at what happens globally. Everyone in the globe is better at second language, third language, fourth language than us. So doing the same thing doesn't make sense. Doing some kind of language makes a lot of sense. Thinking of what fluency, I love that breakdown. So for me, it's not about, we don't care about language, we don't care about the fact that we live in a global world, but to continue to do it at great cost and relatively little outcome doesn't make sense to me. So taking a step back and say, let's do this the right way. Let's do it so our kids actually get something useful. I like that approach. And that this budget seems to allow us to do that across a lot of dimensions of the education we're offering.
Thank you. Commissioner Kleeman.
Yikes. I just want to say that I do support mostly the budget. I think a lot of work has gone into it. I think it's been very thoughtful, and I like the process, and I like the idea of buybacks, and I like the idea of going, it seems like we're going to go into the building level for these buybacks, and that the schools themselves have had a lot of input, the staff and administrators there, which I think is a wonderful thing. I am a little concerned, and this is just for the record, about the cuts at the middle school level. We still really haven't had any feedback about how the new program is working. Losing the social workers, I still think, was devastating, especially at the middle schools. I'm so glad to see one is coming back. And the increase in behavioral referrals at both the middle schools and at IAA is very troubling. And I just hope that in the buyback process, we really consider this. And try to get some of the culture and community and positive supports in place that I think we all need. I mean, I just want to remind us we did well last year. We made a lot of cuts and a lot of changes, but I don't think the outcomes have been as positive as we had hoped in a lot of cases. So just a little reminder of that, that's all. But I do appreciate all the work that's gone into it.
Thank you. Commissioner Judson, did you have a comment?
Yes, please. Hi there.
Hi there.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yo soporto enseñando español y francés en la escuela media.
You get that, Kyle?
Yeah, but she's
Okay.
staying abroad too.
I support teaching English and French in the middle school, for sure. And I ditto everyone saying about how they liked the process. I think it's been very sane. I'm still really concerned about not having kindergarten paras. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Because you couldn't before, but that's what you can now. So we know that for every dollar we spend in early education, we save $10 up the road in high school, kids dropping out of high school, kids getting involved with the law, and special education expenses. We also know that the literacy rate in the Burlington schools decreased in kindergarten after the paras were cut 2 years ago. I think we've got enough data, both national and citywide, to reinstate the paras. Just have to say that. I'm really appreciative of the whole process, and I am with a little bit of a heavy heart because of the paras, definitely supporting the budget, and want to say thank you to everybody for going through a rigorous process, and to Nate and Yao for working so hard on the process. Not easy. I do support the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? Commissioner Harrington.
I also support the budget. I wanted to speak a bit to the issue that Mike Fisher raised during public comment about the ways in which, in a way, arguably, there's been perhaps less transparency or public conversation about some of the particular implementation of the cuts. That was actually I snuck in 2 questions on the budget presentation by emailing them in advance, so they got answered in the presentation, so thank you for that. So in some ways it feels like a leap of faith adopting this budget now, because the implementation process hasn't happened. We don't know exactly what it will look like. I feel justified in making that leap of faith because of everything that I've observed about the ways in which Superintendent Obeng has worked since he joined us. I've been consistently impressed by his ability to listen to radically conflicting views, to synthesize the concerns that he hears, to look for data, to drive decisions, and to put our local issues in a national or international context. And I've been consistently impressed by that quality of attention to things. So at the moment, given that we hired a superintendent midway through the year after so much had already happened, and when we were hiring a superintendent into a district that had drifted into chaos, confusion, whatever we want to call it, it felt like a leap of faith, I'm sure, to hire a new superintendent, and now we're in the midst of a budget that has to be developed really quickly, and we've only been with our new superintendent for several months, but my observations and experiences so far make me think he's the person who can lead this process, and I'm really looking forward to next year's budget hearings when we'll have had the benefit of a full year and a full budget cycle of looking at that kind of data and whatnot. I think because the budget process has taken up so much of our public time, we have all had the chance to see the way in which the superintendent is working very closely with the senior finance director. We've seen a lot of the ins and outs of evaluation of the budget, and even though I hear you saying there's still more things that you need to uncover and discover and regulate and routinize about the fiscal situation, we can kind of see that work. I think we've seen less of the work going on the curricular side and perhaps the staff development side, so we don't have as clear a sense, or at least I don't have as clear a sense of things like how is the district evaluating the loss of the social workers over the past year. I saw a little bit tonight, really cool stuff from the literacy interventionists looking in part at what's going on in kindergarten. So I think we have less, so I hear what Commissioner Kleeman's saying, we have less of a sense of how are we thinking about that. I'm quite hopeful that a year from now we'll be saying very different things. So for that reason, I feel justified in making a leap of faith and getting us into, I hope, the implementation phase.
Thank you. Anyone else, please? Commissioner Curry.
I just want to thank the superintendent and director of finance and all the staff and all the senior directors and the building administrators for the work that was done on the budget. I support the approach that was taken, working with the public. I admire the way Superintendent Obeng came into the district and, really reached out to the public and opened a dialogue with as many people as possible, and got a lot of data together very quickly in a very short amount of time. And I actually like the absence of line item detail. I think that as a board, our job is to focus on long-term vision and not get bogged down in, being the curriculum experts. So I really appreciate that we're not having that conversation this year. And while I agree that we need transparency and we need details and we need to understand more details in that approach when the time comes, I think this budget reflects more of a vision and an approach that is going to set us up for the work we should be doing in the future. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciate the nod towards some of the board goals and bringing more capacity to the middle schools and the social worker. At the same time, I'm going to actually vote no on this. Absolutely no comment towards the work that the superintendent and the administration does. It's really a protest vote about Act 46. I think Act 46 is horrible public policy, and I think we were forced to make a budget by holding our superintendent over a 100-foot bridge by the ankles and basically say, this is the way you're going to budget this year, and the legislature is going to make that decision for you. And I think we're paying for rural districts' needs to do whatever they need to do and to do what they haven't been doing. And I think the legislature is kind of holding us hostage that way. We're an anomaly, and I don't think that's being recognized. And so just in terms of public policy, I think this is unfortunate that we're in this situation. So my vote is purely a vote against Act 46. It's a protest vote because I think you all did great work. But I think we're ending up with a figure that's unfair to our kids. It doesn't reflect our real needs. It doesn't give us the margin we need to restructure. I think anytime we're in a situation where over the past 2 years we've been cut, we've absorbed federal funding cuts of $1 million over the past 3 years. We've taken those on locally, and we lost over $1 million in pilot funding, and we've cut the same amount from the budget. So essentially we've got a spending ability that equates to about 2012 or 2013 in real dollars. So we're not doing our kids any favors, and we're not doing our community any favors by budgeting like this. So that's my position, and it absolutely is no reflection on my respect and admiration and trust in you guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. Commissioner Chena.
I'm going to try to be brief, considering that it's getting late. But I did feel compelled to just share something based on my experience as a school commissioner. This is the third budget process I've been through. The first one was following our budget, or not, it wasn't my budget at the time, it was our community's budget, but the budget being voted down and coming in as a new school commissioner into a very unstable situation and trying to see a budget developed under that kind of pressure. And at that time, it was done in an atmosphere of fear and cuts, and there was a lot of people being pitted against each other, and it was kind of a hostile environment. And what I've seen is a progression from that to the next strategy, which was Howard Smith, who's here. I want to give you credit, which was taking a step back and trying to look at cutting, but also reallocating and adding, and moving in away from the direction of sort of threatening vast cuts and being more strategic. And I feel like that Yao and Nate continue to build on that, and that we're looking at a budget process now that's about strategic planning. It's about having the intention to develop a long-term plan. It's about a sustainability and accountability, and that makes me want to support this budget. Also, I feel that I've seen increases in accountability in our district. I can't provide a list right now, but I've asked if we could create a list of some of these things so we can share that with the public, because I think it'll be important to celebrate and acknowledge that in in those 3 budget cycles, I have seen, and I think many of us have seen, increases in the accountability, and I think that goes to show the taxpayers that we're trying our best to not waste their money and to use it in the most efficient and best ways for the children. I hear people's concerns about transparency, and I have expressed along the way some concern about the vagueness of the cuts. But I just want to emphasize that my understanding is that the reason they're vague is because we have to be sensitive to the staff, and that there's contractual obligations in which we're going to have to give people notice, and some of that notice might be pulled back once we understand the situation better, and just out of sensitivity to those staff people, we can't come out at this time. One of the concerns I have is that between now and the election, though, if RIFs go out, we're going to have a huge outcry of people advocating for their favorite staff, concerned about what's going on, and it's not the best position to be in, and I'm hoping that in the long-term planning we can move out of this cycle, right? So that being said, the final thing I want to say is, as for trusting Yao, I know a lot of people have only been familiar with Yao at this point for a few months, but actually I was just thinking about this while sitting here, that I actually first became acquainted with Yao about a year ago, because it was around a year ago that the search committee was doing our interviews, and we actually, we were scrutinizing Yao amongst many others. And, what arose through that process about you, Yao, I've only seen enhanced as we've gotten to know you better. And to me, that's a good sign that you presented yourself with some really clear ideals and values, knowledge, skills, and talents. And you've only followed through so far in the things you presented. And to me, you've proven that you have integrity. And so I trust that I trust, and I hope others take a leap of faith and trust that Yao has our best interest in the cuts he makes, and that it's not going to be easy for him to have to make those cuts. And that's something that we as a community, as representatives of the community, are asking you to do. So that being said, I want to cut myself off and just say that I do support the budget, and I look forward to the future where we can have a strategic plan and have a healthy cycle of budget development that makes our community feel empowered, that honors the taxpayers and their investment, and ultimately provides the children with the best possible education.
Thank you, Commissioner Chena. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, I'll just close out the piece. Last night in front of the City Council, we did this presentation. I had an opportunity to speak, and I'm not really too keen on being known when my term is up someday that we were just the ones that just cut. But I know last year we had to stop the bleeding, and this year is a programmatic audit of where we want to go. And my hope is that next year, with the delivery of the 5-year plan, that we'll have our marching orders, along with the dollars associated with that, that'll bring us back to reality as to where we want our kids going forward. I've never been a believer in throwing bodies at things. It's not what we do in project management. It's not what we do in the business world. We're very precise on how many people we might add to something, and we're very precise as to when they do their job. They're very accountable, and they have to report, and we report on everything from metrics to efficiencies and so on. So I'm hoping that next year, I'm hoping that within the 5-year plan, there's many things addressed, such as best time and place and sizing for paraeducators, such as any English language learning enhancements that we might have to do, how we're addressing the English and math deficiencies across the board, how we are aligning the pre-kindergarten to meet the demands of our first grade. So maybe we don't need as many paraeducators in first grade because we've laid out exactly what social skills we're asking that the providers of pre-K bring in. So there's many, and I know many of you have other ideas too, so that's certainly nowhere near inclusive, but it's just my side. So, and that's actually what I told the City Council last night, was that we've gone through this, and then we're going to come out the other side, and we're going to bring these programs, we're going to bring programs back that will bring a better enrichment and get these kids graduating across the board, no matter what the demographic is. We have a responsibility to everyone, so that's where I was. Seeing that I think everybody has spoke that wished to speak, we'll go ahead and call the vote. Would you like to read the resolution again, please?
Sure. Yeah, the resolution.
sorry.
Thank you. Motion to approve a fiscal year 17 education spending budget of $58,290,175, which equates to $14,133.35 of education spending per equalized pupil, and is the spending limit imposed by Act 46.
All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. All those against? Brian, did you raise your hand for aye?
I did.
Okay.
Did you get Commissioner Judson?
I did not. Commissioner Justin, I'm sorry. Look at that big hand in that camera. Was that for or against, Commissioner Judson?
It's yes.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing as we have 9 people voting, we have 7 yeses, and we have 2 noes, that does give us enough to go ahead and pass the budget. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item.
Can I ask a clarification before we
Certainly.
move on? So since we just talked about the budget and did not talk about the ballot question, so at what point do we as a board need to vote on that ballot question, or can we direct our staff to craft a ballot question within the law and that reflects what we passed tonight?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and we try to offer the different options that Nate showed you, because one of the things when we looked at it, we felt there wasn't enough information for community members to really decipher through. If they haven't been following the process all along, and you get to the ballot and you look at it and you just kind of get a glance, it might be some misinformation. We've already reached out to council in terms of what the parameters are, in terms of what information we can add. So I would suggest that if we follow up with council, they've already given us the go-ahead that yes, we can add some things, that we go within the law and then present some drafts to the board to finalize in terms of what would go to the voters.
And in terms of the timing, do we have time to work on that?
The timing, I believe we have until January 29th. I should
Yes.
double check that with
At
the
the end of
city.
the month, it has to be within the month we have to pass.
Right. So we don't have a lot of time, and we certainly in that space, we don't have like another time when we would formally come back to the full board and say, here's what we're going with, just so folks understand the limitations.
Commissioner Curry.
I would just like to ask that at the Finance Committee meeting, we see what goes into the total number above the 58 million. I understand you have to make guesses and projections,
And
but
maybe perhaps we could even, if you could check into the wording, maybe at the Finance Committee meeting, we could have that an agenda item, we could discuss that a little bit there.
So, but you're saying that technically it has to be approved within this month?
I
If we don't approve it
So,
tonight?
I'd like to make a point that when it's legislated that we have to do something, and a good example is the city charter on the $2 million. We do not have to have a vote on that, okay? What I would ask that when you go to the Finance Committee with what you're proposing for the ballot language, that you have the discretionary and non-discretionary portions of that. So I know there's the state legislates a portion of that has to be there, so that the only question would be maybe the last sentence, okay? And then that would just be a point of, most of the time, that would just be a point of clarity for the voters. So we would not have to vote on the non-discretionary, only on that area that you would like to present, just for clarity to the voters.
Right.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Chair, could I make a quick comment regarding the budget? I know you want to get going, but it'll be very brief.
Please.
Thank you. First, I did want to publicly acknowledge the work that Senior Director Natalie has put forward in terms of this budget process, and the team that we have back at the office, as well as our administrators who put countless hours, and I mean countless, I mean every single day. So we've talked about other programming. We've literally spent every single day on budget. And part of the reasons why we've spent so much time on it is because we do really want to put something forward that will give us an opportunity when we come back to the next budget. Someone asked me today, oh, you really must dislike budget. And I said, no, because we should have a process that when it gets to budget, we're excited because it's an opportunity. where we get to a place where we say, oh, here's a chance, now we look to enhance our system to make it grow forward. So that's where we've kind of worked towards. I want to acknowledge all the comments throughout the process from all the commissioners. Range of comments, both of support and some in terms of looking critically at information that's been sent. I think that's helpful to have that range of perspective because it pushes us to think about, well, we got to make sure we think about this, think about that, and then you reflect the community because there hasn't been anything that's been said at this table that we haven't heard from community members expressed, and so that really reflects. So when we put something forward, we kind of have an idea why we're putting it forward and the perception of the community. At the same time, it is a tough task, and at some point we have to make decisions. And so our job is to bring forward our best recommendations based on, research, what we experience in the system, and the visioning in terms of where we want to go. So I hope people can appreciate that in terms of what we're putting forward, and we'll continue to work to refine the process. I'm not totally happy with where we are in terms of process. We've come in and kind of work with what we've had to do, but I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to even make it better next year. So thank you for your support and appreciate it. And I will send some of the compliments that you've given myself and Senior Director back to our staff because they've done a lot of the detailed work back at the ranch in terms of moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. You guys are out of the hot seat. Well, I think we're all set there. So can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Commissioner Curry, can I have a second?
Sure.
Commissioner Curry, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Seeing none, consent agenda is passed. I can make up 50 minutes fast.
Keep going.
Gotta have faith in me, folks. Do we, the curriculum committee report?
Yes, brief report. As Commissioner Harrington alluded to, we had a very interesting and informative meeting. We continue to try to establish that which it is reasonable and efficient and effective for us to deal with. We have a large district with all sorts of curricular issues, and we could be chasing down things forever. We got back to our knitting. We established several years ago that literacy for now was going to be a priority. And to that end, we had two professionals who were part of this year, were part of the allocation last year of enhancements, to use Superintendent Obang's language, to our literacy program in the way of interventionists. So each school has a literacy interventionist. So from two different schools, those professionals came and they basically described what their program is and what they do during a school day and how that helps to support all readers. And it's across the board. It was behind grade level, on grade level, and beyond grade level. So there's an accelerated and a remediating impact. And it was just super informative and the kind of thing that we want to use curriculum committee for more, informing ourselves about at the most granular level as appropriate what's happening, how investments are being spent, what kind of metrics we're using, and how we're moving the ball down the field. So tonight was a nice step in that direction.
Thank you to Commissioner Dotson. Any questions for Commissioner Dotson? Seeing none, Diversity and Equity Committee report?
Should I give it since
Please.
Stephanie's absence?
Certainly, go right ahead.
I'm just going to pull up the minutes, and I'll make it like a 1-minute report. Actually, I don't think I need to look at the minutes. I'll wing it. So there were 3 main items on our last agenda. One of them was looking at discipline data, and I encourage people to look at the minutes if you want the details, because I'm going to be very brief, but there's some significant disparities in our data that raise serious concerns. And what came out of our discussion was that we need a better system of data collection, data interpretation, and we're going to continue that discussion at the next meeting. I'll just leave it at that for today. The second piece was an update on our restorative justice task force. So as everyone may know, we have decided that, that we are moving in the direction of a restorative justice framework for our schools, for addressing school climate, which includes all the different aspects of discipline, behavior, anything that influences school climate. So that being said, a task force has been formed, and this is where I'm going to struggle. 5 meetings, yeah?
Yes, we've had 5 meetings.
Okay. There's been 5 meetings, and we're going to just continue to hear about the progress of that work. And so I'll just leave it at that for now. So I guess just to summarize, the task force has begun looking at ways to support us in moving towards implementing restorative justice throughout the whole district. And there are some little pockets and pilot efforts going on. The third piece was we were going to look at hiring practices, and we just kind of checked in. And next month, we are going to hear from Senior Director Fuller about hiring practices and retention efforts. Thank you. I think that was 3 minutes. 3 minutes, maybe.
Thank you very much. Policy and governance report, please.
So 2 things. Kudos again to Commissioners Harrington and Judson for pulling together our superintendent evaluation. You should have received a link to a survey, and I think Commissioner Harrington has already received 6 back from total.
Yeah, I checked. I believe 2 of you, as of 3 o'clock this morning, had completed the board evaluation. We've also invited the senior directors in the central office and all of the principals, as well as the director of the Burlington Technical Center to, so I can't remember offhand exactly how many people that adds up to, but we've gotten maybe half of those responded.
So we should be
send
getting
friendly reminders.
So we should be getting everything by next week. So that's an exciting launch. And then secondly, we are discussing and coming to some kind of plan for how to make a decision about policy governance, how to proceed with policy governance, and that's going to stay on our agenda. We're discussing the idea of actually providing an opportunity for board members to attend the board meetings of the town of Essex and the city of Winooski, where they operate with policy governance.
Thank you. Commissioner Curry, any questions?
Yeah, quick question. So just a question about the evaluation. So I understand that each of us won't be able to have full knowledge of every area of the evaluation, but I did have a question, and I'm not sure if it's directed at you, Liz, or at the chair, but when will we hear Yao's 100-day plan report out, like what reported out from that? Because I felt when I was reading the evaluation many times, if I had heard that, I would be able to answer more of these questions. So I'm just wondering.
So that'll be at the February board meeting, and at the same time, we'll be giving the results of the survey. But we can certainly, that'll be a board discussion that night. There will be an executive session for the board to discuss, so we can certainly integrate any feedback we have.
Great.
So that would be a good opportunity.
That sounds great.
Thank you. Any further questions for Commissioner Curry? Commissioner Kirk.
So ITC's been fairly uneventful, but one thing that we've been toying with and questioning is the pre-qualification of the bids. And Vermont Department of Education and State Board of Education says that any bids in excess of $500,000 must be board approved. That being said, I'd like to put forth a motion to give the ITC the authority to pre-qualify those people.
You cannot, without a suspension of the rules by 2/3 of the vote, amend the agenda with a major item like that.
Go ahead.
So can we make a motion to?
We certainly can. Do I have a motion to suspend the rules for the period to, Commissioner Harrington, help me on the words.
To suspend
To suspend the rules. Can I have a motion to suspend the rules
For the purpose of.
for the purpose of allowing a motion to be heard? You okay with that?
A motion to suspend the rules for the purpose of allowing a motion to be heard?
Correct.
Sure. I make that motion.
Do I have a second? You can't, you made the motion. You can't do the second.
She made the motion.
Oh, you made the motion.
So either one, I don't care.
That's fine.
You,
Commissioner
Kyle, I don't care.
Kirk, Commissioner Curry, Commissioner Kirk. Commissioner Judson, she's in there someplace. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against? None. Passes unanimously. Commissioner
Like me to
Kirk,
read that
please.
motion? So the motion is to recommend that the board authorize the ITC to approve the pre-authorization of selected contractors on the $2 million bond.
Okay, and you will have to get that to her so that she can,
Did I said pre-qualification, I'm sorry. Yeah, and the motion's actually in our minutes from our meeting.
okay, so you can reference it from the ITC.
And I can give
meeting.
it to you, right, I can email it to you or give it to you.
Okay, okay. All those so you made the motion.
Yep. I need a second.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Stoll, second. Discussion.
Yes.
Commissioner Curry.
I'm sorry, when you initially explained why
Yep.
you are asking for authority to pre-qualify, I missed that. Could you explain?
Pre-qualify the contractors that we're
Right,
going
but
to
why are
use
board
for
members pre-qualifying?
the state board says that any bond over, any project over $500,000 needs to be pre-approved by the board.
The
Are pre-qualified.
pre-qualifications have to be approved by the board?
The ruling is, I'll read it right
Okay,
off the
thank
site. The school board shall determine which contractors are eligible to bid on the school construction contract in excess of $500,000. For the purpose of these rules, an award to the general contractor shall constitute one contract. The pre-qualification procedures are as follows, and it goes
Me too,
down
hear
into many more things.
So just clarification, is it the board that has to approve?
That's correct. That's why we're asking
And
for
what
the
you're asking
ITC
to authorize
authorize us to
a
pre-qualify
subset of the board?
this.
I'm a little concerned about that for legal reasons,
Okay, because that's the way it's been in the past, that's all.
that there's been a delegation of that
The
authority?
ITC has pre-qualified all the contractors in the past. That's correct.
That the board's abdicated its authority to do that, to a committee?
That's correct.
Okay. So there's precedent of that? Can we ask Paul Irish?
Director Irish.
The State Board of Ed Rule 6300 talks about contracts over $500,000. Because we have to accept, because the board has to accept the bid within 1%, there is a rule for pre-authorization of qualified bidders. In the past, we have asked that a subset of the board approve or deny who is a pre-authorized bidder. This is not the bid itself, it's just...
Oh, I get that. But, yeah, I didn't know we had a precedent for authorizing a committee.
And I understand if the board feels they don't want to do that, we'll just put it on to
If
the
we
next
have a
special meeting or
precedent,
whenever.
yeah. I just wanted to know.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Anyone? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We now have the resumption of rules.
Can I make a point about that? What you actually just needed was a motion to change the agenda. We didn't actually need to suspend the rules, just in case it
I
ever
had to
comes
suspend the
up again.
rules because it's a major item of a motion. I had to suspend the rules to allow a change to the agenda after the agenda has already been approved.
Huh.
Any further questions on, anything further from the ITC?
No, that pretty much does it. Any other things will be in our minutes.
Thank you. The Finance Committee?
All set.
Nothing, really. We've talked enough about that tonight? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion to consider executive session to discuss, two executive session items. Okay? We have a motion to consider executive session to discuss a student discipline matter where premature disclosure could place the school district at a substantial disadvantage. We also have a motion to consider executive session to discuss negotiations where premature disclosure could place the school district at a substantial disadvantage. Can I have a motion to enter executive session for those reasons? Commissioner Kirk, do I have a second? Commissioner Barlow. All those in favor of going into executive session, please say aye. Aye. All those against? Seeing none, motion is unanimous. We will now resume downstairs for executive session.